Hello, wrenches, and welcome to the Wrenchers Podcast 10 Mill Mastery Edition, the show where the lads and I, Mr. Joshua Taylor, discuss topics that are relevant to today's technicians and, especially today, service leaders. Russell brought up a great question for today's topic. How do we help leaders pick apprentices? Let's get into it.
Great question. And leading into Russell, you said you had something leading in from, we're talking about apprentices and you training apprentices. What was your question, Russell?
So I was really spoiled with my first apprentice. Great guy, older, so he had some maturity with him. His second apprentice at 3 weeks in got fired. First time that I was actually involved in picking someone, and looking back, I can recognize that I should have not even picked the guy, because the entire time we were in the interview, every 10, 15 seconds, he's pulling out and looking at his phone. So, for me, that was a huge red flag that I missed. So when I know all of you have worked with apprentices in the past, if you get the option to select your apprentice, what do you look for in that person that helps you pick somebody that's going to be successful in the field?
Awesome. Stephan, I want you to go first.
I don't think that's a question you can really ask in an interview. How do you know they're going to be successful? You don't. You have no idea what's coming through that door, whether it's an 18-year-old kid at a high school or a guy starting a second or third career. So I think that success comes down to, does he have the environment to support his learning style, perhaps? Is he someone who gets bent out of shape if he gets a little bit of ridicule? Is he a smartass? All these things are going to come through the gate. So, during an interview process, think about it. When was the last time you interviewed for a job? It might have been 10, 15 years ago. How nervous were you? And kids these days, your cell phone is a part of who you are. You have all the information at your fingertips, and it might just be a nervous tick, or he's really into his cell phone. No different than trying to ask someone if they smoke. We've all seen smoke breaks take 10, 15 minutes sometimes, and you're going, man, where the hell is this guy? I think what I look for in an apprentice is, are they even happy to be sitting in that seat? What's their general mood that day? They're coming into a dealership and they're pretty pumped up about it. Okay, cool. I was once that kid, pretty pumped up about it. Maybe I can use this for about 5 years before the realities of flat rate and the OEM world sort of trickle in and really change that innocence of a young child. But you got to work with it, and you got to keep them motivated as much as possible. So, regardless of what comes through the gate, I just try to give them what I want when I was that age. I want to see the shiny new dealership, the new cars, the coffee machine, the pretty receptionist, something to get them interested in coming into work. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of pushes from the OEMs that make the job really kind of suck. And you just got to keep it light, and you got to keep it fun. I mean, I'm in the OEM dealerships now over 15 years, but my humble beginning was at a Canadian Tire in high school. And every time I pass a Canadian Tire with the shop doors open on a Saturday and I see that lube line 15 cars deep, and I'm just there to get, something for the house, and I look inside the shop and I'm like, wow, they still got the same, tire dunker for water or air leaks. And, it's a whirlwind. It brings back a lot of fun, actually, I had when I was young. So I'd want to make sure that for an apprentice, at least they can communicate and they talk and they genuinely look like they're interested, or at least a little bit curious about starting in an OEM brand at a dealership level. And if it's a smaller shop, something to drive them, whether it's a hobby off hours, ask them some personal questions. I think you got to connect with apprentices more on a social level and really just get their mental health sense. How are they going to learn? Am I a good teacher for that kind of learning environment? Because I'm finding ways to try to connect with the different kids that I got working under me. And it's a little bit of a challenge. What you can do with one might not necessarily work with another. So I just look to see if they're willing to communicate with me, I'll communicate with them, and I think that's where it's got to start.
Awesome. Marshall, you're going through this on a fairly regular basis every like 7 to 9 months, and you're fairly integrated with the hiring process. What's maybe not all, but what's like maybe one key tidbit to help you with Russell?
I choose my apprentices based off of personality. So, well, a couple of things, but mainly personality. So, I'm going to spend 50 hours a week pretty regularly with that apprentice. Maybe more one week, maybe a little less the next week. But for the most part, averagely about 50 hours a week, one on one. Our personalities have to mesh. So we have to work together. And if they have a personality that bumps with mine, it's not going to work for 50 hours a week for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. So I typically choose them based on their personality. I also, it's difficult in the interview setting to get them to open up and get some personality out of them. So I like to go with our recruiters to the recruiting events at the colleges and meet them on a not so professional manner where I can cut up with them and get to know their personalities. And then when I go back to the recruiter, I'm like, I want that one, and I like that one, and I like that one. Those are the ones you guys should go after. And if they get one of the three that I pointed out, I'm happy. So that's
Awesome.
usually, and then usually I tell them it's a 50-hour deal. Nobody's going to force you to work 50 hours, but I need that out of my apprentices. We can't force you to work more than 40 hours, but you're going to be in a service truck with me, and I work 50 hours.
If it is what it is, and at the end of the day, this is where Caroline and I, my wife, we were having this discussion yesterday. The difference between the younger generation and the older generation, and I honestly believe that I have to believe, and I do believe that the younger generation isn't unwilling to work. And I think my wife said this well: they need to work the way they want to work, and I think they're headstrong and intelligent enough to understand that they have options. And it's not an understanding that in a hiring process, it's not you as a dealership or as a service leader or as a technician picking a candidate. It's just as much them picking you. And if the fit isn't there, and I use the word fit a lot, fit matters. Right? Fit really matters, personality-wise, characteristic-wise, hobby-wise. Like I bring this up in past sessions, that if as a 40-year-old married with children man walks into a shop with nothing but 25-year-old young men who aren't married, who don't have children, even from a fundamentals of ethics, morals, life experience, we're not even close to the same level. Yes, there's a level of adaptability that has to be there from both sides of that coin. But if when you've got that many people that are so far apart, they're just not going to work. From a personality standpoint, Marshall, I think you're wholeheartedly correct. Like your personality's got to jive, especially when you're in an environment where you got to work 50 hours. Like it's not. You're not calling in sick tomorrow because we worked 10 hours yesterday. Like, I'm sorry. It was a long day yesterday. Guess what? It's going to be a long day today. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. It's going to be a long day every day until Friday. And on Friday, it's going to be a long day too, whether you want to work long day on Friday or not. But when we get home on Friday night, guess what? You get 2 days off. You get your weekend. You recover. Because guess what? Next week, it's going to be a long day on Monday, a long day on Tuesday, a long day on Thursday, and so on and so forth. So they need to understand that if they want in this trade and they want to be successful in this trade, that there's a certain level of conformity to a degree that needs to happen. Yes, they can ask to be flexible, and that those are questions to help you, Russell, in interviews. Like, how willing are they to be flexible? If they're not willing to be flexible at all, that's going to be a problem. If they're not willing to adapt to the team, going to be a problem. If they're not willing to respect authority, but also be open to conversation to understand, okay, if they don't respect, and this is where the respect part comes in, if they don't understand why, it's not disrespectful to ask why. I would almost say it's disrespectful not to. If you don't understand, don't just do the job because you're being told to. Understand why, because it'll make you a better technician. And then learn how to ask it respectfully. Because you don't tell somebody to fuck off. That's not right. That's not how you ask why, right? That's not. And honestly, a lot of us, I know all of us have done it at least once. And I know all of us have experienced technicians and apprentices that will say it that way, because that's their way of saying why. Because they don't understand. We need to teach them. And I think that's where that first 3 weeks, unfortunately, they didn't learn how to be respectful in a short period of time. They've never been taught. And it's awfully hard to teach and grow apprentices when they've never been taught how to be respectful in the first place. Because that's, I think, for most of us, if not all of us, being respectful comes first in personality. You can't get anywhere if you're not respectful.
Well,
as an apprentice.
And like everything with your apprenticeship, Russell, is just like, I'm not saying we treat our people like we're back in the military, but everything that we do should have a purpose, right? So the purpose behind me working 50 hours, I don't have to work 50 hours to make my money. I work 50 hours with my apprentices because it teaches them perseverance. It teaches them how to grind. Because when they're out on their own after 8 months, if they want to make money at what their pay is, they got to work 50 hours. If I start working them at 50 hours right off the rip, when they break out at 8 months by themselves, they work 50 hours. And that's all they know. They know that's what they do. If I work 50 hours, this is what my paycheck's going to be. If I work 45 hours, this is what my paycheck's going to be. Every little thing that I do is literally has a purpose. So like when I take on an apprentice, another example is I take on an apprentice, the first 3 weeks I'm teaching them how to do paperwork. They write all of my stories. Every story. They write their stories and they write my stories. I fix a truck, they're writing my story. Because at an accelerated rate, I'm teaching them how to write stories properly. Not because I'm lazy and don't want to write my own stories and use them as a receptionist, but they have to learn how to write a good story in 8 months and be able to break out on their own and be able to just go out there and kill it. So every little thing that I do in my apprenticeship for that accelerated time, it's all for a reason, because once they break out, they're on their own. They got me, they can call me and bounce stuff off of me, but they've got to go out on their own and make money, and you're not always going to be able to save them, Russell.
100%. 100%. Richard, I know you're actively looking. So what is one thing that you can share with Russell to help choose?
So right now I'm hiring one guy. He's a high school student. He came to us. He actually actively came to us because I had posted an ad, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'll give everybody a chance, right? Like, if experienced journeyman, that's one thing. You can usually tell with an interview process if they're going to be a good fit for the shop or not. But these young folks walking in the door, I hate that term young folks. It makes me feel like I'm 80. But I will give anybody walking in my door who wants an apprenticeship a chance, right? If they really want to be in this industry, my first question usually is, what do you like to do in your spare time? And it's like, I love to wrench on my car. I love to work on my vehicle. Usually from there, it's like, okay, you're gonna grow to hate that, right? I always use the term like never make your hobby your career, because you will come to hate that hobby. But if they're mechanically inclined, I've always been of the opinion that it's always the kids that have kind of struggled in school. You have all these terms now for it, ADHD and all these labels that they put on these some of these kids walking in. And a lot of the times all they need is, they need to be kept busy, and their focus is insane. They learn, they have drive. There's a pretty big gap in the generation where you see where they focused on, really pushing post-secondary, pushing universities. You can actually see this in the current career path of a lot of people, where they come out of university with, six figures worth of debt, and they're flipping burgers at McDonald's, right? Because they were pushed towards this path. And I know from my perspective, having, kids in their 20s, I'm seeing it start to get, there's a lot of pushback now from these generations, and I'm starting to see more of the trades get interested people in that. And now it's just a matter of bringing them in and asking them. And a lot of it comes down to, like Marshall was saying, personality and respect. That's the big thing. I know, Stephan, you were talking about how if the phone is like the cigarette, but people don't smoke during interviews,
Not anymore.
right? We put laws in place and all that, but if somebody's gonna, and I've had this problem with fully licensed technicians walking around on their phone. I had one guy that used to work with me, and he wanted to follow me to the GM store, knowing that I am in a leadership position and I have influence and all that. And he was like, "Hey, come on, I'm going to come and apply." And I said, "No, you're not. Like, until you learn how to manage that addiction, because it is. If somebody is constantly on their phone, it's like smoking. Smoking's still an addiction. If they're constantly on their phone, it's still an addiction. Until they learn how to manage that, they're not going to be they're not going to be able to put 100% into the job at hand, right? So in that aspect, Russell, if somebody pulled their phone out at an interview, I would just continue with the interview process and be like, this is not the candidate for me. You can tell a lot with personality and certain leading questions during an interview, right? Like, what do you like to do in your spare time? Do what if I were to sit you down with a difficult situation, how would you react, right? Like, those are all your basic management interview questions, right? But a lot of it comes down to respect and drive, right? So
The only thing I would add to Richard's statement here is if you are having trouble, if you are part of the hiring process and you're in the interviews with your leadership, Russell, and you're actively participating in the interviews, there are questions. And so Richard alluded to, typical management hiring questions that you ask. The challenge with those typical hiring questions is they don't personalize to the individual. Typically, they'll give you a broad answer, and they can be very canned answers. I would suggest to you, if you are part of those interviews, go online, because there's lots of resources on LinkedIn. Like Sandy Zanino is another person that you should connect with if you want to understand a little bit better about HR and hiring. And there's lots of other HR professionals and content creators out there that you could look to for more unique questions that are non-standard, that might get you a more specific answer, because these are questions that are non-standard. So when they're non-standard, I mean, like, let me be more specific. So when I ask my son when he gets off the bus, how was your day? I don't ask how was your day. I ask, what did you learn in math class this afternoon? So I'm specific with the time. I'm specific with the thing I'm asking about. And these are things typically not done in interview questions, because they're broad spectrum questions looking for an overall thought pattern, but they can become very canned. And somebody who is actively interviewing, even techs who may be, C techs, D techs, who may not have a full dipstick, they will know typically off the top of their head, memorize quick answers to be able to divert. When you get very specifically asked questions, they have to think on the spot, on their feet. And that's a great way to kind of relate to Richard's answer, where they have to come up with a problem-solving answer to the question you're asking, is very specific to them. That would be a way to kind of utilize personality like we're talking about with Marshall, and how we're talking about, each individual step that we've all mentioned is going to help you. I think you need to utilize all of them to help identify red flags. Utilizing their phone on a regular basis. Yes, that could be, and I'll parrot that, is it could be a nervous tick. That's what they go to. They're nervous, so they go to their phone. That might not be they're addicted to their phone. It's how they escape. And I think that's part of a generation where they don't know anything else. That's their escape. So when things are hard, that's what they go to. Instead of looking up and looking the person square in their face, it's like, I'm nervous. I'm sorry that I'm nervous. Can you help with that? I want to be as helpful as I can. Being nervous in an interview is not going to mean that they're nervous on the shop floor, right? You have to get, and to Marshall's point, being in a somewhat social setting where there's less pressure, less stress, getting to understand them a little better. And that's not always necessarily a capable thing for you to do, or your leadership to be capable to do, but getting them in a position where they feel comfortable to talk and enunciate and carry a conversation the way you would want to and expect to in the shop, that might be helpful. That's a great question, Russell. Great question.
Oh no! That's the end of another episode, Wrenches. That's okay. We'll get another one next week. On Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, and on Saturday every week. Folks, thank you for listening and watching on your streaming service of choice. So don't forget to like, comment, share, even maybe hit that rating button or the thumb button below. I appreciate you. We appreciate you. The gentlemen, the lads, we thank you very much for listening and watching. Remember, folks, negative pushes, positive pulls, and always clean your toys before you put them away.